Welcome back, folks. I am excited, but also feeling very tender speaking about this topic and recording this episode in particular because, it is really tender for me talking about closing the doors to business number two, which was my group coaching program for therapists that I started 4 years ago, which is just wild to think about. But if you don't know, when I was starting out as a therapist, I was working my private practice. And, this was what, 2018, 2019, right? So, like, social media was still pretty new for therapists. There really wasn't a thing as an Instagram therapist yet. So, there were like a few of us really kind of getting our feet wet online. And I was posting really frequently, was posting a lot of content directed to my community, right? The Black and Brown community. And I will never forget, I received a DM from a fellow therapist, and she says something along the lines of, Josie, I am just in awe of what you're doing online. Like, can I pay you for your time so that you can teach me what you know? And that was kind of really the beginning of this business. I did not set out to start a business coaching program. It was just not at all in like it was just not something that I was thinking about. I was just out here being great and doing what I had to do and what I wanted to do. But that conversation led to many other conversations, and I realized, wow, like there's something here. There's like a really big need. And of course, I'd been to therapy school, so I knew that marketing and business and systems and all of that was just not something that we were taught in school, nor, now in hindsight, nor do I really think that that's really the place for us to learn the business side of being a therapist. But nevertheless, in doing my own little market research, I realized like, wow, there's a need here. I know how to teach. I love to teach, and I have some really great results. So let me just put something together, right? And so kind of that morphed into the business that I'd created. It was called the Healing Strategy. And so, I was working in my private practice at this time, and it was thriving. I had made six figures in 8 months, which is really unheard of in the therapy space. By that point, when I started the second business, I had something like 100+ person wait list for my therapy services. So like things were good, and it was just like a really prosperous, like abundant time where I could have like really gone in so many different ways, right? Because again, right, I'm recording this in 2023. This was 2018, 2019, right? So like we weren't as like hip to mental health and like open to mental health as we are now, right? So it was just like the dam was just opening, and so I decided to support therapists during that time, right? And so I created this group coaching program, and it was really exciting. It was really exciting. It was a different business model. I was not working one to one, nor was I working on like personal development work. This was very masculine. It was very strategy focused, which is, very much like me. I can be very motherly and very nurturing, but I can also be very like logic, strategy focused. And so I didn't know that before that, right? Like, or I knew that I had a strategic mind, but this was a different way of putting those gifts out there, right? I'd worked in management before, but this was like a very different way. And because I was an entrepreneur, I could like really play and figure out like, how do I really want to serve? And so, started gaining traction. I was putting myself out there, taking calls and being on social and this, that, and the third. And so within the first year of that business, I also hit six figures, right? So things were great. not just because of the financial aspect of it all, but because I was really helping people and changing and helping them to change their lives, right? I help therapists prepare for mat leave, which, as you probably already know, can be really, really stressful when you are an entrepreneur, especially if you're a solopreneur. I helped therapists, achieve financial freedom and time freedom, which I would venture to say is even more can feel sometimes even more meaningful and impactful than just having more money, right? Therapists would come into my program, working 30 one-on-one client hours a week and going down to, anywhere from 10 to 15. So it was like a really big deal. And, I think that the thing that I'm like probably the most proud of when it comes to that business was really helping therapists open up their eyes to all the ways that they can really put out their medicine and their magic into the world, right? The therapy field can be incredibly oppressive, not for clients, even though that is a little bit debatable, but for therapists, it is and can be incredibly oppressive, very dogmatic, very structured. There's only one way to kind of do this work, kind of mentality. And so really supporting therapists and helping them give themselves permission to become writers, to create courses, right? Like to do workshops, to go into business coaching as well. Like it's probably the biggest gift that I think that this container that I created was able to give those clients. And so, it was just something that I like loved. I was, again, it was thriving financially, impact wise. It was like high impact work. And you know what I say? The personal is professional and the professional is personal. And as you shift, the business will shift. Right. And I spoke about this in season one. And, I will say though that yes, it's true. As you shift, the business will shift. But this doesn't always have to happen, meaning that as you shift, the business doesn't always have to shift. I think a lot of it has to do with your own owner's intent, with the business's energetic contract. And I'll get into that in a second. Right. It doesn't always have to happen that way, but more times than not, for those of us who are still very much in the business, right? For those of us um, who have these particular contracts, this is kind of how it happens, and that's exactly what happened for me. And so I was shifting quickly. I mean, I'm talking about quantum leaping. I've spoken about this before, definitely in season one, right? Where I used to think that quantum leaping was like bullshit until it happened to me and it changed my life. I mean, it literally did, but also this idea that we can timeline jump is very, very real. And so personally, I was making decisions that were literally putting me on different timelines and doing so quickly. And my friend Ada has this like really beautiful analogy that's always kind of stuck in my brain when she talks about like timeline jumping and how like one decision that you make right now can literally put you in a different timeline or in a different path. And the analogy is like if you think about like train tracks, right? You've probably all seen a train change tracks, right? Like whatever the little thing is, right, that kind of like bends and then it changes the track. And so the train goes on that different track. That's exactly what, like, I call them choice points, right? You can make a choice point right now. You can make a decision right now that literally changes the track, the path that you're on. And so in that particular, this was like a few years ago for me, that was a year that things were happening in my life. Life was lifing. And I had to, I was making these decisions. I had to make certain decisions that was literally placing me on different timelines, goals, and, things that felt viable at one point no longer made sense. And again, that's why once I realized that quantum leaping is a real thing, it was just like, it's so trippy because it's almost like one day you're like, yes, this works, this goal makes sense. And then another, like 2 days later, something happens, you're literally energetically a different person. And you're just like, wait, that's not even what I want anymore, but that's what I wanted 2 days ago. Wait, what just happened? Anyway, maybe I'll do a different episode around quantum leaping and all of that. But that was what was happening for me. And so naturally, I started to feel disconnected to the business. And it wasn't necessarily that I was like disconnected to the work or my clients. It was almost like I was feeling disconnected to like the particular contract that my business had. Like I was disconnected to the energy of the business. And every business, every entity has energy. Everything's made up of energy, right? I'm sure that you've gone into a store, you've been into someone's house, or you just been in a place and you're just like, oh, I feel this sort of vibe here. I like the vibe here. It's like the same exact thing. And my friend and business coach, Ada Rojas, this is what she does in her business. So go check her out if you want. If you are a business owner, if you're a coach and you really want to learn how to tap into the business of your energy, she is a person for you. And so, I started to feel this disconnection. And, it was really frustrating because, I could tell that something was changing, that like the business was morphing into something, but I couldn't yet tell into what or how it was going to morph, right? And I think that can sometimes be like the double-edged sword of being like a bruja and being super tapped in, is that sometimes you get information that you can't get act on, but you don't always know if you can act on it or not. But anyway, so because I was feeling this disconnection, and I could just like intuitively again just like know that I was feeling disconnected from, rather, the energy of the business. I went ahead and I tapped into the energy of my business. And again, this is something that you can learn to do. Um, it was clear as day. And oh my gosh, I'm like even getting emotional, even thinking about it, because I could just like literally close my eyes and go back to that day sitting in front of my altar, and opening my journal and kind of doing some automatic writing, and the guidance just coming that way, right? And it was clear that ancestors don't stutter. Like when you're tapped in, your higher self does not stutter. And the wisdom, the guidance was that the cycle with me as the leader of this business was coming to an end. And that was really hard. That was so hard for me. And I had to sit with this. I had to sit with this knowledge and this guidance for over a year, right? And I didn't know there was going to be a year before I can actually exit. But over a year, I had this insight that this cycle with this business was coming to an end, and I had to sit with so many like really hard things that, again, because a person is professional, professional is personal, really connected with me personally, right? Things like, here I built this thing from nothing, really. Again, I did not come necessarily from, like, I didn't have an MBA. I did not come from a business, you know, um, like a business background. Sure, people in my family, I do come from a family of entrepreneurs, right? But it's very different than like the thing that I created. When I first hired my business coach, the business was already in business, right? Like I already had paid clients, things are already going, right? So I really do feel like I'd built this incredible multi six-figure business out of nothing, and something that I was so proud of. Like, what do you mean that is coming to an end? What do you mean? Like, there's nothing broken, there's nothing wrong. What do you mean that this thing needs to come to an end? And what was really underneath that was this idea of, that I held, that I didn't know that I held, but this was really shining a light on that. That you know, the idea of keeping something or, being with the thing that you worked hard on simply because you worked hard on it, meaning that like, you stay in a particular situation or you stay with a person. I mean, you can extrapolate this to relationships and really life, but you stay in the thing because you worked hard for it and you don't want the hard work to go to waste. Right. So that was really the insight and the wisdom and the message underneath that. Right. That, yeah, sure, you made a ton of money here. You impacted, over 100 therapists here. Yeah, sure. This is great. And this chapter needs to come to an end. Right. Again, the same thing with me that, and I've mentioned this in season one, just talking about this entrepreneurship being a constant cycle of death and rebirth, and sitting with that for a while and talking to my therapist and friends and all of that, I've come to this realization that things matter in a season and seasons change, and you have to be okay with that. Right. That doesn't mean that your hard work goes to waste. It just means that you can leverage the lessons and that hard work in the next thing that you do, right? Like we must close certain doors for others to open. And again, cognitively, I knew that. But for it to now be at my doorstep and for me to actually have to act on it, yeah, it was a little bit difficult. It was actually very, very difficult. And I also had to sit with this idea of like, man, this is how I'm gonna make my first $1 million, right? Like the way that the trajectory that the business was on, right? The way that I was setting it up, it was to make $1 million. Right. And I knew that I could, because I was changing and I was like pivoting and I was like really shifting. I could have very easily, continued to build the business. I could have hired program coaches, trained them and like really completely removed myself from the service delivery. But again, that wasn't the path for me in this particular business. Right. And I think that that's a lesson for a lot of y'all, a lot of us, myself included, where you're where sometimes your mind and your intuition is at odds, right? Like it's like that you could like strategically, logically, you can move forth in this direction, even though your intuition, your gut is telling you something different. So I had to kind of contend with that too. Where it's like, I know this business, I could easily make this into a multi-million-dollar business, but I knew that sure, maybe that is a trajectory for the business, but not with me as its leader. Right. And then I also had to contend with, what are people going to say? And it's this, I always say that for those of us that are really committed to our self-awareness and are really unlearning and decolonizing the way that we think and, how we move and operate in the world. I think that we often operate with this double consciousness, right? Where it's like we know better. There's like parts of us that know better, right? And then there are the other parts of us that are still, kind of former versions of ourselves. And so I cognitively knew that it doesn't really matter what people say, right? Like I've already shifted so much in my business, in my career, and publicly at that like this was going to be no different. But again, it was just a part of me that came up, and I had to be with that part, and I had to nurture that part, and I had to, like really love myself through that. Right. It's okay to embrace the pivot. And I really do think that, for those of us, that are here to really help others awaken, I think that there's something to be said to doing that publicly, right? That we need to move away from um, overvaluing staying the same. Like, I don't know, that's to me, that shit is whack. I mean, I know that like from like very practical experience, but also, sameness and staying the same just for the sake of staying the same is whack, right? And it can really hijack and handicap us in so many different ways. And so All that to say, like, embrace the pivot, the pivot. It is a privilege, I realized, to pivot, right? And so since I had that privilege, why not actually do it? And so again, I'm just kind of like showing y'all and being honest with you all about kind of the messy parts of closing a business, because I could have very easily made this episode about like, yeah, let me tell y'all about my incredible business and like talk to you about all of the wins and all of the things that I was able to do and experience because of the business. And like, yeah, y'all probably already know that. But this is the stuff that I feel like we need to be more honest about, especially as business owners, especially as women, especially as folks of the global majority, because no one wants to talk about the mess, right? And we need to, because it's a very real part, not only of entrepreneurship, but of creating the legacies that we want in our lineages, right? And so I do just want to go on a quick tangent, but it's actually not a tangent because it's so incredibly related. While this was happening, I was kind of going through this, and again, this spanned over a year. I remembered a energy reading that I got. My gosh, at this point, it might have been like 3 years ago. And the person who gave me the reading, the healing strategy, my business coaching program for therapists, was very young. It was maybe like a year old or so. And so it was, I was still like getting things off the ground. So I was very energized by it. And I remember this reader telling me, don't get too attached to this business because this isn't where your work is. And I remember feeling crushed and also like, man, this girl don't know what she's talking about. She definitely knew exactly what she was talking about, because 3 years later, here I was, right? She said to me, like, this business is really a bridge for you. And again, I didn't get it then, but she was like, this business is going to morph into something else, right? It's going to, like, its path is going to change, like, but you are not designed to be leading this business forever. And again, it kind of goes to what I was saying before about business having their own energies and their own contracts. And as its leader, like you as a CEO, as its leader, kind of like a child, is almost like you're the guide or the shepherd, right? You're not just there to satisfy your, like, what your ego wants. You're really there to help guide the medicine of the business into the world, right? And so, kind of taking that understanding of business and business building and entrepreneurship, and kind of, thinking about that, and also about what this energy reader was telling me, like, everything made sense, because again, the path was there. I could have very much continued, in this business. And I honestly think that I would have been okay, right? I could have kept going down that path, but I don't think that path would have been in my highest good. It would have been a good path, but would it have been in my highest good, right? Would it have been the best one for me? Don't think so, right? And again, I just want to be like, say this caveat again here, that like, this doesn't work for all businesses. Yes, every business has his energy, its own energy and its own contract. What I'm saying is that, some businesses are designed for you to be its leader until you sell it, or until it no longer needs to be in existence. Again, like, this is very personalized. And again, if this is like really fascinating to you and you're really intrigued, I really do suggest that you do your own research, or, as I mentioned before, reach out to my girl, Ada Rojas. And so, just to kind of wrap this up here, because I've been doing a lot of reflecting on this, obviously, as I am, oh my gosh, what the vision that I'm seeing is like, I'm putting the final nails on the coffin, which can be a little bit morbid, but that's just kind of what I'm seeing in my third eye right now when I think about this. It does have a lot of beautiful flowers on top. I will say that. But anyway, um, looking back at this entire kind of multi-year process, um, this decision and this guidance, and like when I finally made the decision, okay, like I'm going to end this, I had to end this, and then make kind of the strategic plan for it. It came around the same time that I was making decisions in my own personal life that that required me to really stand more solidly in my sovereignty, right? And I was individuating from communities that I'd belonged to that were no longer in alignment, right? And I was like really choosing me and really advocating for myself, right? So there was this like emergence. I'm like seeing like a phoenix, if you will, rising from the ashes. Like I was kind of in like a season of that. And if there's something that I've learned now, working with therapists for many years, again, working with over 100 therapists at this point, is that, and this is not to generalize, but I would say that this is true most of the time, right? Therapists choose therapy as a career, as a reflection of their unmet needs. And that is then reflected in their business, right? So here I was, on the one hand, moving away from caretaking others in my personal life and really standing in my power, right? And strengthening my boundaries, right? But then here I was in another area of my life, in my business, where the opposite was happening, right? Where energetically there was caretaking that was happening in my business. And I can be totally honest about that now that I have this awareness, because I didn't back then. And again, this is nothing to say, I'm not saying anything about, like my clients, or this is not a judgment call on therapists or the clients that I've served, right? This is really just some insights that I've gleaned since doing this work for so many years. And so, you know, it made sense that that was happening, because that business was made in the image of that version of myself, right? Of that caretaking version of myself. And that no longer was who I was becoming, right? And so I share kind of these pieces to further illustrate how, depending on the business that you run and depending on your purpose in this lifetime, as you shift, the business has to shift, right? I was one way, and I created a business and attracted clients that made perfect match for the person that I was, right? As I shifted, that needed to shift as well. And so embrace the pivot, embrace the shift, right? If you are tuning in and you're listening to this, and you know in your bones, because y'all, if there's anything that I know, is that we are all highly, highly intuitive. And there are things that we be knowing. We be knowing, but it's a completely different story if we allow ourselves and give ourselves permission to like be in that knowing, act on that knowing, and actually like acknowledge that knowing, right? But if you know that there is a shift that needs to happen in your business, because a shift is happening for you, or just because you feel it in your bones, like reach out to someone for support, right? You do no one any good, not the people that you want to serve, not your legacy, and definitely not yourself, by staying boxed in to a business, a plan, a place, just because you said that this was what you were going to do, or because you worked really hard. Okay, I'm going to just reiterate what I said before, and I want to really leave you with that in regards to this, which is, you know, things matter in a particular season, and seasons change. Please allow the change to happen. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.